So it's my pleasure now to invite our next speaker on stage. Cecilia Bonefeld-Dahl is the Director General of Digital Europe. And Cecilia will now address the topic, has Europe lost the B2C revolution? And will Europe be the winner of the B2B digital industrial revolution? Cecilia, over to you.
Thank you so much. So I think that the previous two presentations have really showed that we are at a stage now where digitalization is entering all industries. And before I go on with what is Digital Europe, I just want to tell you a little bit about my own background. So I was born into the ICT industry many, many years ago, 20 years ago. And I spent my first part of my career working in IBM, Oracle. I built a couple of SMEs myself. Global SMEs in tech, and actually spent a long time in digitalizing companies like Maersk, Lego, Grundfos, Danfoss, so industrial companies around in the world. And so this is a question very dear to my heart, and I'm very proud of being representing the digitalization of Europe through our association Digital Europe. So, I don't have a clicker, so maybe, is this one? Yes. Okay, thank you. Very good. Okay, so who is Digital Europe? Digital Europe represents 25,000 digital companies around in Europe. Our mission is basically to bring the benefits of digitalization into the European society. We actually have two chambers, you could say. We represent some large corporations, digital corporations, but also we have nearly 40 associations on ground in Europe working with digitalization and representing the digital industry. So we normally say we have people on ground also really running the digitalization of Europe. But why is this important? If we want to digitalize Europe and the industry, we also need a very strong digital industry in itself. And we are seeing now that the borders are basically being diluted. So what used to be a digital company, is Bosch a digital company? I think you are. We see new members joining us as, for example, MSD. It's a purely pharma company, but a bigger and bigger share of their revenues actually goes into preventive service, digital services. So actually looking at people behavior, using data analysis to see how to prevent the diseases instead of just giving medicine. So the industry concept of digital is really getting more and more blurry in the sense that digital is now into everything. I remember as a young woman being a part of the digital industries, everybody said, it's so boring, you know, IT, well, how can it be so interesting? And I kept on saying, but you know, it's the only growth factor left, you know, it's really transforming the society, it's bringing a lot of benefits, you know, the jobs of the future will change totally. And now we see it coming. And I'm so happy to hear an example like Bosch saying, we know that some of the jobs will be now in the scary scenario we say lost. But what does lost really mean? It means transformed. The question is just how do we make sure that these jobs stay in Europe? Okay, so one of the things that we do is that we work, of course, with digital policy. This is our main area. We are an association that works with digital here in Europe. And as you see, these digital policies are basically entering all the industry. And we see it as our task really to bring these digital policies and make sure that we have a regulatory and investment framework in Europe that supports the digitalization of industries here in Europe. So, have we lost the battle? Well, I think one of the really interesting things about digitalization is that it has an enormous speed. It scares us a little bit, but it's also very interesting. It means that when the development goes so fast, there are no winners and losers. Right now, yes, Europe is quite, if you look from where the companies are based, behind on the consumer part. So the business to consumer, we see mostly big American and increasingly Asian companies entering that. So is that a set goal? Is it going to be like that forever? No, but they had something that is important. Speed is very important. Second factor, scalability. Scalability. Our biggest challenge here in Europe is that we have a fragmented market. A very fragmented market still. And this is why the EU is so important. We need the EU. We formed it 60 years ago to align our practices and our markets and the way that people live in Europe 60 years ago. What they had is scalability, and they had the speed. So let me tell you something. I used to be the president of the Danish IT associations, and everybody was talking about why is it that we don't do unicorns? Why is it that we don't do big companies anymore? It's Grundfos, it's Bosch, they're all companies. Where are all the new companies? We started looking into it. We make many unicorns. I mean, do you know the company Skype? You know Skype? Yes, you know Skype. You know companies like Unity, companies like SimCorp. I mean, because I'm Danish, I'm just mentioning you a couple of Danish companies, a couple of huge companies created here in Europe. We make lots of this. The problem is, what does a company look for when they need to grow? They look for scalability, risk-willing capital, and speed. And we, as Europe, need to improve in that. So, have we lost? No way. What we do have is that we have a very, very strong industrial base. If we look at how the creation of value is really increasing, we see that at least 70% of the value created from digitalization and the internet is really within traditional industries. So let me give you one case. I think, we looked into the details of GE and Bosch today, but for example, a Norwegian company, Elkjøp. I remember visiting their site. They managed to bring down their operations cost by 20% and their inventory capacity by nearly 50%. Did they spend those money in cutting jobs? They implemented, robots to basically pick and collect and package stuff. This is how they save the money. So those robots, did they take job away from people? Yes, they did. But do you think a company like that does this only to save money? No. They reinvest it. They reinvest. A company's nature is to grow, to scale, to be efficient, to be bigger, to be better. To be bigger and to be better in a business like that, you need better people, you need better services, you need to buy companies, you need to grow, you need to scale. So I think my personal view on this is that no, we will not be losing a lot of jobs. Oh yes, we will. But that efficiency, as in any other industrial revolution, will create new jobs, new service jobs. It will give capital and capacity to the company to grow and improve their business. This is the nature of businesses. Okay, so yes, we do know that we are a little bit behind, right? We need to speed up. But I also think that what we are seeing now is that the European institutions have an increasingly focus at the digitalization and the digitalization of industries. And there is no doubt that the investment framework that we need to see in the future needs to be much more focused on this. If we want both big companies like Bosch and GE to improve it, but also the SMEs, not least, of course, we need to find an efficient way of investment and look how we can really create hubs of digitalization and improvement of industry in Europe. So let me, sorry, I got one back. I think, there's a lot of data on this slide, but if we look at the one with the two hands, the value creation of business to business is twice the one of business to consumer. So we have a chance here, and I think we have a momentum. We have started looking at this years back, and we need to keep that focus and really make it work. And it demands both a very strong ICT sector here in Europe, and it demands, of course, a focus and an investment environment that allows us to continue to do so. And we will definitely take an active role in that. So we have definitely, within these industry, many examples. We saw GE, we saw Bosch. I can mention a couple of others. I mentioned Elgiganten or Elkjøp as one of them, going through the same process. If you look at big international companies like Lauritsen, a shipping company, or Maersk, they are doing exactly the same. They are looking at how can they use AI to analyze, for example, their optimal fuel consumption, saving both the environment, but also saving cost when a ship goes through water, the water resistance. And what does that create? It creates savings. What do you do in a company with savings? You create growth. So let's stop being so scared of the future and look into how do we keep those jobs here. I mean, should be the question that we ask ourselves. How do we make an investment framework and a regulatory framework that allows these companies to grow across the borders of Europe and stay here and create the jobs here? So that brings me to the next one. Only one figure I would like to highlight here. 41% of firms says they are uncertain about the benefits of AI. I would have thought it was more. First we used the machines and the technology basically to not being able to carry all the heavy stuff. Then we didn't have to be physical present with the PC and the iPhone. Now it's basically taking over thought processes. It's like a future movie. If you go back and you look at old space movies, we have today what they thought we would have, and in the future we can't imagine. We're just starting to imagine. But that's normal evolution. Why not embrace it? Why not really look at how we make sure that our kids, they are not only users of an iPhone, but they can create something with it. They know how to really use technology, both for efficiency, but also for value creation. This is the question that we should be asking. And how do we make sure that the business leaders actually knows about how to use AI to win that game? So, taking to skills. This is a hard part, and it's something that in the EU is a big focus on. How do we upskill our workforce? How do we not leave people behind? How do we make sure that also our children can actually enter this? And here we have a problem. I am sorry, but we do. The speed of education has to change. The speed of education has to change. As speed goes up, the speed of how we educate has to go up. And I think that the answer to that is also technology. We can actually, for example, let me give an example. I was working with Grundfos on a huge project in 2008. Everybody who has been in business remember 2008. The world a little bit collapsed, right? It was cost cutting, the crisis hits, Europe. What do we do? What happened? All class courses was erased. No travel, no class courses, too expensive. It's not a good thing. This is really a bad thing. But what happened was that a total video platform, an educational platform was created. They have businesses all over the globe. And in 2-3 months, a lot of the training really moved into a digital space. So somehow we need to make sure that our educational system really moves at a different speed. It's not an easy one. It's not an easy one. But if we crack this one, I'm pretty sure that we also crack the code of sustainable digital growth. Okay, so what do we do with Europe? How do we make sure that we actually create that regulatory framework where we can grow? I think we have a tradition here in Europe that we really want to look at regulatory frameworks to protect our consumers, to protect our citizens. And frankly, as a person, I think that is a good thing. I think that could even be a competitive angle. But we have to remember, digital doesn't know borders. And many of the companies who wants to grow doesn't only want to grow in Europe. So we need to make sure that we do not create a regulatory framework that is so strict that it prevents growth, that it becomes so complicated that the SMEs have no clue how to navigate on this, that each time they look just across the border in EU, they start worrying about, how can I grow here? They have different rules. This is too difficult. I don't have the capital for that. I don't have the people for that. So balanced regulatory frameworks that also have global connections, because the growth that we create, the companies that you saw today, they are not only European, they are also global. So we need to make sure that we also stay aligned, of course, with a global regulatory framework and not create too many barriers. So next question. So how do we make sure that the investment is really focused at that digital process? I think it's coming. I think we need to look also, as Mrs. Evans said, from 2020 and onwards. And I think we need to make it very targeted. We have different business groups. We have digitalization of the big SMEs, but the SMEs is a part of an ecosystem. What we heard from GE, for example, is that this model is also changing the way that we basically work, and much more in the ecosystem. We saw Nokia teaming up with Nokia, which comes from a different industry, but of course has deeply expertise within connectivity. And without connectivity, frankly, without a 5G and a connected Europe, not only in one country, but across borders, we will have serious problems, because without connectivity, we don't have the value creating applications and development on top on that. So I think that it sounds very practical, but it's actually a huge issue. But if we look at those collaborations, and we actually look at how can private companies work across the businesses, and how can the public sector really work with investment on top of that ecosystem, I think we have a very, very good angle on how to focus the investment in digitalization in Europe. So public-private partnerships in ecosystems, even in digital hubs. We see we are in Estonia here, the masters of e-government. Why don't we leverage that? We know Germany, one of the big industrial bases. They have a big expertise in 4.0, not only Germany, but we have really good expertise within Europe. So we should make sure that we leverage that in digital ecosystems. And I'm getting we have to take the questions now. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Cecilia. That was great. Thank you. Would anybody like to ask Cecilia a question? Yes, gentlemen, just straight down here. Great. Mike is coming, yeah.
I come from a part of Europe that, or at least I represent parts of Europe that are totally excluded from all these brilliant ideas. And I keep asking myself, what is business and industry going to do about Europe's rural, remote, mountain and island areas? Because the data signal, non-existent in many cases. Broadband, we may laugh about.
Yeah.
But a lot of the equipment that's actually made is used in those rural, remote areas. And we keep ignoring it. So the question is quite simple. What are we going to do?
Okay, thank you very much for that. Cecilia, yeah.
Well, if I had the money, I would put them there. I think it's a very good question. I think that connectivity is basically something that we should look at, like roads and highways. Of course, we need to connect all the areas. And it is a huge investment that Europe is far, far, far behind on investment in infrastructure. And you asking me in the digital industry, I would say it's a human right to have connectivity. We should definitely make sure that we don't make winners and losers, and it is a responsibility that we reach all areas. So I mean, the answer is right now that if you look in connectivity, Europe is very divided into different ways of handling connectivity and infrastructure investments. And it is one of the big questions that can we actually align, our investments, but also our regulations within the infrastructure area. And to me, this is one, you know, you have all the exciting things, but you have some basic things that we need to fix. And this one, we really need to fix. And we need the member states to work very closely together to make sure that we have the right investment, but that we also have the right regulations and alignment of our rules that ensures that people can actually get connectivity and that we don't get these areas that are totally locked out from digital. I can only say as much as that.
Because I know in my own country, in Ireland, this is a big issue with some rural areas, and there are people who have to travel for miles to maybe access Wi-Fi connections for their business, which seems completely ridiculous in this century.
Yeah,
I mean, is it should the regulation come from the EU, or in what way do you think can you push that the infrastructure is much improved?
So we have an inheritance here that some countries have, you know, mostly private investments and only public investments where it's really needed. You have others where this is, totally a public activity. So, I mean, the answer to that is that the rural area or the areas without connectivity, I think no matter what, it's a responsibility of public investment. And sometimes it's done in the countries where there's highest connectivity. It's mostly a mix between a lot of private investment, but supported by public wherever that is needed. And frankly, I think private-public partnership in this is the right model. But it is also the level of investment. You know, you need to create a business environment where it's actually favorable for these companies to invest also in the areas on the edge.
Okay, thank you for that. Do we have any more questions for Cecilia? Gentleman here has his hand up. Thank you.
I'm Philippe Debuc from Hill & Knowlton Strategies, and by the way, a former CEO of your Belgian member Agoria. You have mentioned a huge problem about education, skills, and so on. We know that we struggle to find enough people in the STEM education. Do you think that your organization, your people, your businesses can do more in order to make the STEM skills attractive for younger people? Because if you don't have enough in the basic education, you will not have them later in the business. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for your previous contributions to the association. So, I mean, Digital Europe actually has the mandate of something called the Skills Coalition. So it is 17 coalitions on ground around in Europe that supports STEM and digital skills and job creation. And there is no doubt that the contribution of companies is quite big. A lot of our members, our big multinational members, are actually quite committed and is already setting targets for themselves to educate, 1 million, 2 million people, and to bring, for example, unemployed into work with digital skills. So we have a huge commitment from our members, and this is one of our, key activities in supporting the STEM and digital skills creation in Europe. Could we do more? I think, as we heard a little bit from DE also, we need to also look at the new methods and how we upskill the existing workforce. One thing is looking at the young people, but at least from our side, we're also looking into how can we also look at that part of upskilling so we can follow the speed of change. But I think, companies are actually very focused on this. Without the right resources, it's going to be really tough to grow. So it is a problem. I mean, I even have foreign members saying, yeah, well, I hire around 40,000 globally technical engineers, but in Europe, I can't find anyone. So somehow we need to make it much more attractive and invest much more in these skills that can make our companies grow and these jobs actually to stay in Europe. It's a key factor.
Okay, Cecilia, on that point, we'll leave it, but thank you very much for that. And are you staying for the networking sessions if people wanted to?
Sure.
Yeah, so there you go. If you need to link up with Cecilia, thank you very much for that. That was really excellent. Well done.